in the harsh, unforgiving winters of the northern marches. Stealing a lord's cloak meant a swift trip to the chopping block. But finding a massive jet-black wolf pelt abandoned in the snow and wrapping it around your freezing shoulders to survive the night? That didn't mean death. According to ancient, unspoken laws of the lycanthropes, it meant you just unknowingly married the Alpha King. The winter of 1347 was recorded in the parish registries of Valmont as the Great Frost. The rivers froze solid enough to march an army across, and the birds fell dead from the sky mid-flight, frozen stiff before they hit the cobblestones. For the nobility safe inside the thick stone walls of High Keep, it was a season of roaring hearths, spiced wine, and political manoeuvring. For Rosamond Fallow, a lowly scullery maid relegated to the outer stables, it was a daily battle against freezing to death in her sleep. Rosamond had not always been a servant. She was born to Thomas Fallow, a respected wool merchant. But when a ruthless plague took her father and his debts fell to the corrupt local magistrate, Lord Arthur Remington, Rosamond was seized as collateral. Stripped of her modest silks and forced into coarse, scratchy wool, she was banished to the kitchens and the stables, her hands calloused and her face perpetually smudged with soot. The Great Frost had coincided with the Winter Solstice Summit. Lord Remington was hosting the Northern Lords, desperate to curry favour with the most terrifying and powerful ruler of them all, King Cedric Harlaw of the Iron Ridge territory. The common folk whispered that the Harlaw men were not entirely human. They said Cedric commanded an army of shapeshifters, beasts that walked as men by day and stalked the forests as wolves by night. Rosamond, pragmatic and exhausted, had always dismissed these tales as tavern gossip meant to scare disobedient children. To her, King Cedric was simply a brutal warlord who required too many roasted pheasants for dinner. On the third night of the summit, the cold reached a deadly peak. A blizzard howled through the courtyard, tearing the wooden shutters from their hinges. Rosamond, having worked a grueling 18-hour shift, scrubbing copper pots in freezing lye water, was denied entry to the lower servants' quarters by Mistress Clara, the tyrannical head housekeeper. "The king's men require the extra cots," Mistress Clara had sneered, her breath pluming in the frigid air. "Find a pile of hay in the stables, girl, and make sure the king's destriers have fresh water before dawn." Shivering uncontrollably, her thin dress offering no protection against the biting wind, Rosamond trudged toward the stables. Her teeth chattered so violently, her jaw ached. She knew with terrifying certainty that if she went to sleep in the unheated barn tonight, she would not wake up. The cold was a physical weight, pressing into her bones. As she passed the armory, a dark shape in the snow caught her eye. At first she thought a beast had died in the courtyard. Half buried in the fresh powder lay a massive fur. Rosamond approached cautiously, her numb fingers reaching out to brush the snow away. It was a mantle, heavy and thick, crafted from the pelt of a monstrously large black wolf. The leather on the underside was impossibly soft, lined with dark velvet, but the fur itself was what drew her in. It radiated a bizarre, unnatural heat, as if the animal it belonged to was still breathing beneath the surface. She looked around. The courtyard was deserted. The guards had long retreated to the guardhouse to huddle around the braziers. Whoever had dropped this, perhaps a drunken nobleman stumbling back from the feast, would not miss it until morning. Desperation overrode her fear of the whipping post. Rosamond dragged the heavy pelt into the stables, burying herself deep in the hay bales, and pulled the massive fur over her shivering body. The moment the dark fur enveloped her, the brutal cold vanished. It was not just warm, it was intoxicating. The pelt smelled heavily of crushed pine needles, wood smoke, and a deep, musky scent of amber and male sweat. It felt heavy, protective, and overwhelmingly safe. For the first time in years, Rosamond felt a strange thrumming in her veins, a comforting heat that seeped through her ragged clothes and warmed her very soul. Wrapped in the discarded fur, lulled by its unnatural warmth and intoxicating scent, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, completely unaware that she had just triggered a magic older than the stone walls of the keep. What Rosamond did not know was that the pelt belonged to King Cedric Harlaw, and he had not dropped it in a drunken stupor. Cedric was an alpha, and the pelt was his ceremonial shifting skin, a deeply magical sacred garment imbued with his essence, shed in the snow during a painful, forced suppression of his wolf form earlier that evening. To touch an alpha's pelt was a crime. But to wrap oneself in it willingly, to sleep within its scent and let it fuse with one's own body heat, was something else entirely. In the ancient laws of the Iron Ridge Pack, it was the ultimate act of submission. It was the acceptance of a mate's claim. Dawn broke with the cruel, blinding glare of sunlight on fresh snow. Rosamond awoke with a start, the heavy bells of the keep tolling the morning hour. Panic seized her. If she was found sleeping past sunrise, Mistress Clara would have her flogged. She threw off the heavy black pelt, immediately gasping as the freezing stable air hit her. She quickly folded the massive fur and shoved it deep beneath a loose floorboard in the empty tack room, piling old saddles over it to hide her crime. She would return it tonight to the courtyard, exactly where she found it. No one would ever know. But as she rushed to the kitchens to begin hauling water, Rosamond realized something was wrong. The scent of the pelt, that intoxicating blend of pine, dark amber, and raw masculine musk, was clinging to her. It had steeped into her skin, her hair, and the very fibers of her ragged dress. Even after scrubbing her face and arms with freezing well water, the heavy scent remained, radiating from her like a phantom embrace. Inside the great hall, chaos had erupted. The heavy oak doors were barred. Lord Remington stood pale and trembling by the high table, while the visiting nobility murmured in terrified, hushed tones. Pacing before the hearth like a caged predator was King Cedric Harlaw. Cedric was a terrifying figure of a man. Standing well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and lethal, he wore dark leathers that stretched tightly across his muscular frame. His eyes, usually a cold steel grey, were currently flashing with dangerous, unnatural flecks of glowing amber. Beside him stood his captain, a scarred brute named Gideon, who had his hand resting ominously on the pommel of his broadsword. "My king," Lord Remington stammered, wiping sweat from his brow despite the draughty hall. "I assure you, no thief in Valmont would dare touch your belongings. We are tearing the keep apart." "It is not a mere belonging, Remington," Cedric snarled, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the stone floor. The king was fighting a visceral, agonizing panic. His mantle was his tether. To have it taken was a violation of his deepest instincts. Whoever has taken it will not just lose their hands. I will tear them limb from limb. Down in the lower corridors, Rosamond was carrying a heavy tray of fresh bread and salted butter toward the hall. As she approached the heavy oak doors, the guards pushed them open to let the servants through. The moment Rosamond stepped over the threshold into the great hall, the heavy murmuring died out. But it wasn't because of her. King Cedric stopped dead in his tracks. His head snapped toward the entrance. His chest heaved as he drew in a sharp, sudden breath. The amber flecks in his eyes suddenly consumed his irises entirely, glowing with a terrifying, primal light. Mate. The wolf inside him, previously raging and volatile from the loss of the pelt, suddenly purred, slamming against his ribs in frantic, possessive elation. The scent of his ceremonial mantle was thick in the air, but it was no longer just his scent. It was perfectly, seamlessly braided with the sweet, delicate scent of crushed lavender, rain, and female warmth. Ancient lichen lore was absolute. The magic of the mantle did not activate for a thief. If a thief wore it, the pelt would remain cold and lifeless. But if a woman wrapped herself in it, seeking its warmth, and the magic accepted her, the bond was struck. It was a blood-deep, irreversible ritual. The king's soul had just been tethered to a human. Cedric's gaze locked onto the small, soot-stained servant girl holding the bread tray. Rosamond froze under the heavy, predatory stare of the northern king. The room spun slightly. Why was he looking at her like that? His gaze felt like a physical touch, burning through her coarse woolen dress. Before Cedric could move, the shrill voice of Mistress Clara shattered the silence. The head housekeeper burst into the hall, clutching the heavy black pelt in her arms. "My lord, my king," Clara shouted triumphantly, marching toward the dais. "I found it. It was hidden under the floorboards in the tack room." Lord Remington gasped in relief, though his face quickly turned to thunderous rage. "Who hid it there?" Mistress Clara spun around, pointing a bony, accusing finger directly at Rosamond. "That wretched little rat, Rosamond Fallow. I saw her creeping out of the tack room this morning before dawn. She stole the king's fur to sell to the peddlers." The hall erupted in gasps. Rosamond dropped the tray. The heavy wooden platter clattered against the stone, the fresh bread rolling into the dirt. "No!" Rosamond cried out, her voice trembling as guards immediately flanked her, grabbing her arms roughly. "No, I swear it. I didn't steal it to sell. I found it in the snow. I was freezing. I only used it to survive the night." "Silence, thief!" Lord Remington roared, eager to prove his swift justice to the king. "Captain of the guard, take this girl to the courtyard. Chop off her hands at once for daring to defile the king's property, and then throw her in the dungeons to freeze." The guards yanked Rosamond backward. She screamed, thrashing against their iron grips, terrified tears spilling down her dirty cheeks. "Please, I meant no disrespect. Please!" "Hold." The single word wasn't shouted. It was spoken with a quiet, lethal authority that made the temperature in the room drop. King Cedric stepped down from the dais. The crowd parted instantly, nobles scrambling over each other to get out of his path. He ignored the snivelling Lord Remington. He ignored Mistress Clara, who was holding his sacred pelt. He walked directly toward the guards holding Rosamond. "Release her," Cedric commanded softly. The guards hesitated, looking to Remington, but the king's captain, Gideon, drew his broadsword an inch from its scabbard. The sharp scrape of metal was enough. The guards instantly dropped Rosamond's arms and backed away. Rosamond fell to her knees, shaking violently, staring at the king's heavy leather boots. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for him to strike her himself. Instead, Cedric knelt. The giant of a man lowered himself to the stone floor until he was eye level with the trembling servant girl. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently catching a tear that fell from her chin. His thumb brushed against her cheek, wiping away a smear of soot. He leaned in, burying his face in the crook of her neck. The entire hall gasped in scandalized horror as the king inhaled deeply, his nose brushing against her pulse point. Rosamond's breath hitched, her heart hammering like a trapped bird against her ribs. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the exact same intoxicating heat that had saved her life the night before. Cedric pulled back, his glowing amber eyes locking onto her terrified brown ones. The scent was undeniable. The bond had settled into her very blood. She was human, fragile, and terrified, but she smelled of his wolf, of his pack, and of his soul. Cedric stood up, towering over the hall once more. He turned his terrifying gaze to Lord Remington and Mistress Clara. "If any man or woman in this keep lays a hand on her," Cedric said, his voice echoing with absolute, terrifying finality, "I will burn Valmont to the ground with all of you inside it." Lord Remington sputtered, utterly bewildered. "My king, she is a thief, a common maid." Cedric reached out, took the heavy black pelt from Mistress Clara's trembling hands, and turned back to Rosamond. With surprising gentleness, he draped the massive fur over her small, shivering shoulders, pulling it tight across her chest. "She is no thief," King Cedric declared, his voice carrying the weight of ancient laws that the humans had long forgotten. "She wore the mantle of the Alpha beneath the winter moon, and she survived it." He looked down at Rosamond, a possessive dark smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Tell me your name, little bird."
Rosamond,"
she whispered, clutching the fur to her chest. "Well, Rosamond," Cedric said, his voice loud enough for every stunned noble in the room to hear, "pack your meager things. You are no longer a scullery maid of Valmont. You are coming back to Ironridge with me, as my queen." The journey to the northern marches was a blur of biting winds and terrifying speeds. King Cedric did not ride in a carriage. He rode a massive, monstrous warhorse, and he kept Rosamond secured firmly in front of him, enveloped in the very black fur that had sealed her fate. The terrifying warlord treated her not as a prisoner, but as something infinitely precious, his chest a solid wall of heat against her back. When the towering obsidian spires of Ironridge Keep pierced the winter fog, Rosamond realized the sheer scale of the world she had stumbled into. Valmont Keep was a mere outpost compared to this fortress. Ironridge was carved directly into the jagged mountainside, a sprawling citadel of dark stone, roaring hearths, and thousands of fiercely loyal subjects. But as Cedric led her into the great hall, her fingers tightly intertwined with his, the reception was far from welcoming. The Lycan Court was a dangerous, predatory place. The lords and ladies of the pack did not bow like human sycophants. They bared their throats in submission to Cedric, but their eyes tracked Rosamond with open, ravenous hostility. To them, she was not a miracle of the ancient laws. She was a fragile, scentless human, a profound insult to their brutal hierarchy. Leading the silent opposition was Lady Beatrice of House Ashford. Beatrice was a pure-blood Lycan, a statuesque beauty with ice-blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. For a decade, it had been understood among the nobility that Beatrice was the most logical choice for Cedric's queen. She was a lethal warrior, deeply entrenched in the political maneuvering of the northern packs. Seeing the Alpha King return with a soot-stained, wide-eyed human merchant's daughter was a slight Beatrice would not forgive. Later that evening, as Rosamond sat in the opulent royal chambers, bathed and dressed in fine, dark silks, that felt impossibly light against her skin. The heavy oak door swung open. Cedric entered, dismissing his guards with a sharp flick of his hand. He crossed the room, the heavy tread of his boots echoing against the stone, and knelt before her chair. "You are trembling," Cedric noted, his deep voice softening to a rumble that vibrated pleasantly in her chest. "They hate me," Rosamond whispered, her pragmatic nature refusing to let her play the fool. "Your court, your people. I am a commoner, Cedric. A human. I do not belong in a wolf's den." Cedric's amber eyes flared with a sudden intense heat. He reached up, his rough fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "You belong to me. The magic of the mantle does not make mistakes, Rosamond. My wolf chose your soul before my human eyes even saw your face." He stood, pacing toward the roaring hearth. "There are factions within my court, purebloods who believe humanity is a weakness. Beatrice Ashford is already whispering treason, claiming that the ancient ritual was a fluke. But I am the Alpha King. My word is absolute." "Is it?" Rosamond asked quietly, standing to face him. Her years surviving the cruelties of Mistress Clara and Lord Remington had taught her a harsh truth. A king who forces his people to accept a weak queen will not remain king for long. To survive in Iron Ridge, Rosamond knew she had to understand the rules of the beasts. She had spent the afternoon discreetly reading through the heavy, leather-bound tomes in Cedric's Solar, familiarizing herself with the Lex Luporum, the ancient laws of the Pack. The texts outlined the strict societal structure of the shapeshifters. The Alpha, the supreme ruler, bound by strength and blood magic. The Prime Council, elders and war captains who advise the king. The Enforcers, the pure-blood warriors who police the territory. The Claimed, mates chosen by fate, whose authority is derived directly from the Alpha. But there was a footnote, a dark, terrifying caveat that Beatrice was undoubtedly planning to exploit. A mate claimed by the pelt is bound by the soul. Yet should the Pack formally reject the bond, the Queen must prove her iron in the Whispering Woods, lest the Pack devour the crown. "She will invoke the right of the eclipse," Rosamond said, looking at Cedric. Cedric froze, his broad shoulders tensing. "I will not allow it. I will slaughter any wolf who dares challenge your place." "If you do that, you prove them right," Rosamond countered, stepping closer and placing her small, soft hand against his armored chest. "You prove that I am a pet to be protected behind a wall of swords. If I am to be your queen, Cedric, I must survive them, just as I survived the Great Frost." The challenge came exactly 3 days later, during the Feast of the Winter Moon. The Great Hall was packed with the Lycan elite. As Cedric raised his goblet to officially announce the coronation date, Lady Beatrice stepped out from the crowd, her silver gown shimmering like frost. "We respect the magic of the Alpha's mantle, my king," Beatrice announced, her voice ringing out clearly. "But a queen of Iron Ridge must be a mother of wolves. She must possess the cunning of the predator. We invoke the ancient right. The human must walk the Whispering Woods until dawn. Alone." A tense, deafening silence fell over the hall. Gideon, Cedric's captain, reached for his blade. Cedric's eyes bled into a terrifying, luminous amber, a low, murderous snarl ripping from his throat. The very stone beneath their feet seemed to vibrate with his killing intent. "You dare," Cedric began, his fangs elongating. "I accept." Rosamond's voice was not loud, but it was unwavering. She stepped around the high table, refusing to cower. She looked directly into Beatrice's icy blue eyes. "I accept the right." Cedric whipped around, grabbing her arm. "Rosamond, no. The Whispering Woods are entirely populated by rogue beasts and venomous traps. It is a death sentence for a human." "Trust me," she whispered fiercely, squeezing his hand. "Or they never will." At midnight, under the blood-red glow of the lunar eclipse, Rosamond stood at the edge of the ancient, twisted forest. She was stripped of her royal silks, wearing only a simple wool tunic, heavy leather boots, and the massive black pelt of the Alpha King draped heavily over her shoulders. She was given no weapons. As the heavy iron gates of the keep locked behind her, the absolute darkness of the woods swallowed her whole. The temperature plummeted. The wind howled through the skeletal trees like dying men. But Rosamond did not panic. She pulled the black fur tighter around herself, letting Cedric's intoxicating scent and unnatural warmth ground her. She was the daughter of a merchant. She knew how to assess inventory, evaluate risks, and outsmart corrupt men. Beasts, she reasoned, were simply men without the polite lies. She did not wander aimlessly. She found a narrow ravine bordered by sharp, impassable briars and positioned herself with her back to a solid rock face. She used the heavy snow to mask her human scent, burying herself just as she had in the stables of Valmont. For hours, nothing but the wind kept her company. But as the moon began to set, the distinct, terrifying sound of crunching snow reached her ears. It was not a rogue beast. It was a massive, silver-furred wolf. The beast stalked into the clearing, its icy blue eyes locked onto her hiding spot. Lady Beatrice had cheated. Unwilling to leave the human's death to chance, the noblewoman had illegally shifted and entered the woods to execute the queen herself. The silver wolf lunged, its jaws snapping toward Rosamond's throat. But Rosamond had anticipated the treachery. In her days as a scullery maid, she had learned exactly what kept the rats and feral dogs out of the Lord's grain stores. Earlier that day, she had visited the keep's apothecary, secretly lining the pockets of her tunic with dried wolfsbane and crushed glass. As the beast attacked, Rosamond threw the heavy black pelt over the wolf's head, blinding it. At the exact same moment, she hurled the toxic mixture directly into the creature's sensitive snout. The silver wolf howled in sheer, agonizing pain, thrashing wildly as the wolfsbane burned its respiratory tract. Rosamond didn't hesitate. She grabbed a jagged, heavy stone she had scavenged earlier and brought it down with brutal, unforgiving force onto the wolf's back leg. A sickening crack echoed through the woods. The beast collapsed, whimpering, rapidly shifting back into its human form. Lady Beatrice lay in the snow, naked, coughing up blood and clutching her shattered leg in horror. Rosamond stood over her, breathing heavily. The heavy black pelt pooled at her feet. She did not look like a frightened human maid. Covered in snow, her eyes blazing with an adrenaline-fueled fire, she looked every inch a deadly, merciless queen. "You broke the sacred laws, Beatrice," Rosamond said coldly. "By your own pack's rules, your life is now forfeit to me." Before Beatrice could beg, the trees erupted. Dozens of massive wolves burst into the clearing, led by an enormous, nightmarish black beast with glowing amber eyes. Cedric and his enforcers had tracked the scent of Beatrice's betrayal. The Alpha King shifted mid-stride, standing naked and terrifyingly lethal in the snow. He looked from the broken, weeping Beatrice to his human mate. Rosamond reached down, picking up the heavy black fur. She calmly walked over to Cedric and draped it over his scarred shoulders, a reversal of the night they met. "Your kingdom has a traitor, my king," Rosamond said softly, the scent of the pelt wrapping around them both. "I suggest you clean your house." The pure blood enforcers, witnessing the fragile humans standing victorious over their greatest warrior, immediately dropped to their knees, baring their throats to the snow. They did not bow to Cedric. They bowed to her. From that night on, no Lycan in the northern marches ever questioned the Alpha King's claim. The scullery maid from Valmont did not just wear the discarded fur. She wore the crown, ruling the Iron Ridge territory with a pragmatic, terrifying grace that even the most feral beasts learned to fear and revere. Did Rosamond's dramatic journey from a freezing scullery maid to the fiercely cunning Alpha Queen of Iron Ridge keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved this dark, medieval werewolf romance, please hit that like button and share this story with your fellow fantasy romance addicts. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling tale of fated mates, dangerous magic, and royal betrayal. Stay tuned for more epic romantic adventures.